Hi folks, today we'll be going over my third and final lesson on the Hare Krsna Movement, here on Lessons from the Purple Chair. Hi folks, welcome back to Lessons from the Purple Chair, one intellectual's musings from the comfort of a big purple wingback. I'm your host, Professor Timothy R. Crowe. Okay guys, if you've been following my last two lessons on the Hare Krsna Movement, then you know that we left off at the end of lesson 2 with the death of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the guru who came over here from India to America in 1965 and founded ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, better known as the Hare Krishnas. In 1977, he went back to Vrindavan, India, to one of the temples that he and his devotees had built, where he finally passed away at about the age of 81. So now it must be asked, what would happen with these mostly young college-age devotees who were so dedicated to Prabhupada and the Krishna movement? What would they do without the leadership and the example of their founding guru, their acharya? What would happen to this movement that was only about almost 12 years old? Well, what would happen? Well, get ready, because it is one heck of a roller coaster ride. I promise you, this is like a soap opera for both the positive and the negatives. But it is a heck of a story. And before I even get into going into that, I'd like to emphasize something else about Prabhupada. I talked about how he was their spiritual master, here, the acharya, their example within that movement, within that religion, which very much follows in the old Vedic tradition of the guru and the devotee. However, the dedication to Prabhupada goes even a little deeper than that, I think, with a lot of these Western followers, especially the ones that first came in. Because you got to understand, not only did this man teach them the religious philosophy and and how to chant, and how to make the bhajan, and how to do the Sankirtana, excuse me. But that's just the top layer. You got to understand, this man came over here to a group of young Western students, mostly, and he taught them and structured with them a Vedic society, an Indian-based religious society. He created a subculture with these devotees. You understand, he didn't just teach them the religion and the rituals. He taught them how to dress. He taught them the social structure between men and women and children, between householders and holy men. He taught them how to cook the proper food, how to dress the proper way. He taught them how to put the talak on. He taught them how to ritually bathe. He taught them how to build a proper temple to Krishna and the other deities, and and the proper rituals, and helped them get all of the proper instruments they all needed for this, the proper musical instruments, the ritual instruments of the temple, the deities themselves. Taught them how to build a Hindu temple. This man literally taught them everything they needed of their own Vedic subculture. He basically restructured them and taught them, and guided them on how to be Hindus. So literally, Prabhupada was the source of all knowledge for them, from higher knowledge from a religious point of view, down to social and domestic knowledge. This Prabhupada literally was the of the focus and the source of everything that they had built over these years and everything they became. So his loss really just jerked the core out of them and almost pulled the rug out from under them. And how they come to cope with it and how they managed to survive is a fascinating story. And one thing I love about it is that with new religions, when I say new religions, I mean non-traditional religions come into the West, and how they progress and evolve is a very interesting lab to see how religions and religious movements can evolve. Now, as I said, the Hindu religion is one of the oldest on earth, and this Namasankirtan movement of Chaitanya goes back to the early the late 15th century, early 16th century. But still, when it came to America, it was new, and to see how it progresses and evolves within this culture is a good little microcosm of the macrocosm of how all religions evolve over time. And we're going to be going into that at the end here. Okay? Now, the problems that nearly destroyed the Hare Krishna movement in the 80s and 90s really started even back when Prabhupada was alive and right when he died. The seeds were already set then. The first one would be what later become known as the fratricidal war. And this actually revolved around the concepts of householders, or people that were married, as opposed to sannyasi, the people who took ascetic vows to become basically Hindu or Vaishnava monks among the men. What had happened is that Prabhupada had set up to arrange marriages. The way it's done, in the traditional Hindu system, and he started arranging marriages between his followers. And his criteria was very much the way Hindus do. You find somebody that was compatible. They were single. They got along well enough. You got them married. Love was not an issue. This was a form of devotion. However, that didn't quite work. And he actually, when it came to who could teach the religion, who could be a spiritual master, who could be a guru, he made it very clear in the beginning that both householders, grashta, men, and who had families, who were married and had families, as well as sannyasi, the ascetic monks, the celibate monks, could either one could be spiritual masters. They could be guru. Let's harken back to Bhaktivinoda, who was the father of his guru, and a great guru himself. He was a householder, had 14 children, and he was one of the major players and pioneers in the modern worship of Chaitanya's Vaishnava. So there was definitely a precedent set, and he made that very clear. So he really encouraged his followers to marry and for the men to teach. And a lot of the men who were householders became presidents of some of the temples that Prabhupada, appointed them. However, one thing he wasn't counting on was that you're trying to take a cultural norm in one society and inject it into a completely different society. And this caused a culture clash and culture shock. As we know, in the West, it's mostly love marriages. Now, there had been, arranged marriages and matching, in America, practically since America was founded. But by the 60s, it was very much, of course, love marriages. So to arrange marriages among a culture used to, conditioned to love marriages, it didn't really work very well. Most of the marriages had problems and did not survive. And Prabhupada, he's constantly hearing the problems and the fights and the breakups and the issues. And it's also, remember, this teaching within the Hare Krishna movement In Vaishnava, women should be subordinate to men. You are talking about Western women. And it really, young Western women too, out of college, it didn't work out too well. And once he saw all these marriages failing and all, and falling apart, he became frustrated and he flat just discouraged. He stopped arranging marriages, matching marriages, and he encouraged all of the younger men to take sannyasi, to become these chaste, holy men, and hundreds did. Mostly out of religious zeal and idealism of coming into this. These are young men, and you can guess what's going to happen. Young 20-something-year-old men that are very zealous about a religion and about this ideal, and they're all into this. As the years go by, that choice, they may start second guessing it. But I'm going to go into that a little later. But the problem that it started to develop was that the sannyasi started seeing themselves as superior to the householders, and a lot of these householders had already taken some leadership roles as temple presidents and as teachers. Well, these sannyasi would show up into some of these temples and just try to take things over and expect the householders to completely be submissive to them and bow to their leadership. And of course the householders were like, well, I have as much right to teach as you. And this created a schism. A lot of people, some people siding with the devotees, siding with the householders. A lot of them siding with sannyasi, and the argument went on. And this was starting even while Prabhupada was alive. Now the second issue was who was going to replace Prabhupada as the head guru once he passed away. And this one was an issue that even Prabhupada was worried about, as who, of course, as he knew he was getting older and his time was limited, and who would actually keep this going in his absence. And I'm sure he had the fear that once he passed away that this movement could die out. He is determined to see that didn't happen. Now, the first move he took was he established a group of devotees that he handpicked, some of the more intelligent and intellectual and even-minded and devoted of his of his devotees to run that he thought could run it once he was gone. So he formed was known as the Governing Body Commission, the GBC, and technically they had the power to run and the final say within ISKCON once Prabhupada had passed on. So another thing that Prabhupada had worried about is that he realized, he actually had said he came over here hoping to get the greater intellectuals, the academics, the more spiritually inclined people, more mature people into his movement. But he often said he got the dregs of society. And in truth, it was the time of the counterculture, time of the hippie movement. And what he got was mostly young college kids, college dropouts, very intelligent young people, and very zealous and very idealistic, but they were very immature at the time. And he realized this. And he also realized that they were not conditioned and raised within a Vedic form of society. They were not raised in a Hindu society and its structure. So thus they didn't quite have the reverence that's naturally conditioned from childhood for the positions of guru and that level, and as well as being a devotee and what all of that meant. And there was a lot of Western ambition among these young Westerners. And he understood that none of them really had enough training and maturity and experience and and long-term devotion and sacrifice that he had given to actually replace him to be as an example as the Acharya. Thus, on his deathbed, what he decided to do was he did not name one particular, and they were all anxious to see who he was going to pick. He did not pick any one particular devotee to be his successor. What he did do, because he felt like they all still needed his training, he named what was known as Rativik gurus. In other words, these were gurus who were actually able to initiate people only as initiates of Prabhupada himself, even post mortem. In other words, and that these young men could initiate new members as into some to be students of Prabhupada and help guide them in Prabhupada's teachings through his many books and recordings and lessons. So they, this was more of an initiatory position, not full guru, where they were not spiritual masters. He was the spiritual master. They just helped guide. They were just assistants, and someone that could initiate new people in. But they were not to initiate anyone, as them being their guru. Now that's an important thing. And he named 11 of his top followers and students. And this was going to be an issue. Trust me. You're talking about a bunch of very young men out of college. Some who drop out of college, some who experiment with drugs and free love and all of this. And now, they've become very zealous and idealistic about this particular religious movement. But they're still Western people, and they were very, and the natural ambitions and the prestige and the position is a big issue with them, far more for a lot of them than devotion. And all of this, so you're putting these young people into a power position. So it's going to get interesting. It's going to get very interesting. Now, with him naming these 11 gurus, Rativik gurus, this heightened even more this clash between the householders and the sannyasi, because every single one of these gurus that he named were had took the vow of sannyasi. They become renunciant monks. So now that they held a certain power as gurus, and they were sannyasi, suddenly the householders really started to be even more subjugated and deappreciated. And the clash between the gurus and the sannyasi and the householders as teachers, really was really heightened, and really was made it even more of a dividing point, to the point that there was a lot of issues. And with these establishing, these initiating gurus, even though Prabhupada had made it very clear that they were just to initiate people as his students, that they would help guide, it didn't take long before they started taking on all of the privileges and the obedience expected towards a guru or a spiritual master. They started trying to emulate Prabhupada with all the quirks, with all the perks, of people bowing to them and taking and serving them as gurus with their food and the fanning and sitting on the vyasya chair, the guru's chair. This was starting really went to their heads. Pretty much the whole thing about Prabhupada saying just initiation was not really taught much about, at least in the beginning. So the problems are already starting. You have these gurus, and you started getting followers for certain ones of these gurus, and them cite, and whenever they come into a temple, they would kind of take things over, even if they had a president that had been teaching before. And the students would start to gravitate toward one guru or another guru. Start to be a clash between gurus when they got together in certain temples. So the way that they tried to solve that initially was they come up with the zonal guru idea. Basically, they divided up the world into different zones, and they established a guru for each one of those zones. It's supposed to have been controlled through the GBC. But really quickly, it came to the GBC was having less, which was a lot of them were made up of these householders. It really started to become a clash between the GBC, which is reflective of this householders to sannyasi, is being reflected in the GBC, mostly householders, to the gurus, and most all sannyasi. So this argument became even a bigger organizational issue, and the GBC, quite frankly, was not having a lot of power over what was going on. A lot of these zonal gurus were just kind of running things the way they wanted to. Now, and of course, this was going to become a big problem. And the next problem that they started getting, and this was later on, this was getting into the 80s, was the financial, was how they got their economy, how they ran their institution. Now, Prabhupada had them going out and doing Sankirtan on the streets, and pandering for money, getting donations, and selling his books, and really that brought in a ton of money. People give $1 here, $2 there. They'd be performing and all of that. Believe it or not, and they did this every day. It was bringing in quite a bit of income. And then he also had the farms that with the dairy products that's coming in. They also had another business, Spiritual Sky, which made incense, and they're still around. Actually, that was one of the bigger businesses that's still around. That made a lot of money. They had their book publishing, and the sale of Prabhupada's books. And it brought in a lot of money. However, by the 1980s, the world had changed. The age of Aquarius was long, and the hippie era was long done. The era of the 70s, which had a lot of new religious movements and religious experimentation, that had passed as well. In the 80s, we started getting into, there weren't hippies, there were yuppies. And these, and this was the Reaganite years, the time when people were more concerned about business, making money. That's what most youth was trying for. So the spiritualism movements, people lost interest. So therefore, the book sale, Prabhupada's book sales really went down. Another issue, like with the vegetarian restaurants that they ran, which was another big success. Well, when they first started, there wasn't a lot of Indian restaurants around. While the 80s, Indian restaurants were starting to take off, and they were a lot more spicy. The Bhagavad Gita recommends not to eat hot peppers. So, the Hare Krishna's prasadam is not very spicy. Other Indian restaurants were, and so that started to dig into their, and also at that time in the 80s, vegetarianism wasn't as big as like the vegan thing is now. So the restaurants started failing. Also, these were very young people, young and inexperienced people running some of these businesses, and they started to fail from their inexperience. Plus, throw on top, by the 80s, a lot of laws in many states had been passed where you were not allowed to solicit money in public places like train stations, bus stations, subways. These places, the street corners, they could be broken up. So that really cut into their funds, and so the Hare Krishnas were really concentrated on how each guru in his zone was really, and each temple was really concentrated on how to bring in money. And they tried a lot of different things. And some of the things that was being tried by some of these gurus was not quite legal. So between this clash between householders and sannyasi, which carried over into the GBC, the governing body, with the zonal gurus and the economy, you can see that there was that things were becoming very, very shaky in ISKCON and the Hare Krishna movement. Now, with all these problems, it all came to a head and started just falling apart or exploding in the 1980s, and mostly because of these zonal gurus. as I was saying earlier, these were, you got to understand, all of these young men, all the original 11, had been, younger men that come out of the counterculture. They were in their early 20s or mid 20s when they got involved. They had this the zeal. They had this charismatic leader that they worshipped and adored, and they saw themselves, the idealism of them being guru, becoming guru. It was a part they were playing. And sometimes you wonder, and I'm not going to say they weren't devout, but it becomes very apparent from what all happened that a lot of them saw themselves as in this role, playing this role. And as the 80s came on, the pressure of that role, of their celibacy, their chastity, of having to be the leaders of this, also having to find ways to finance their temples and their movement, as well as having all the perks of a guru, being a person basically worshipped as a spiritual master, with your devotees doing anything you say, laying on their face when you walk in the door, or fanning you, giving you this venerable status that it really went to their heads. I mean, that type of power would be very seductive, and most of them started getting with the pressures and this role put on them that they were not conditioned for, as someone like Prabhupada, who was raised in India, raised in and in this culture that respected this type of guruship. And heck, in India they have problems with it too. There are plenty of frauds and gurus in India. So really, this you could say that this still carried over into America. It's not that strange. But either way, however you want to look at it, gurus started snapping in every zone. And some of the downfalls were incredible. First one I'll talk about was Hans Dutta. His real name was Hans Kari. He had been one of the earlier devotees of Prabhupada there pretty much from the beginning. He had actually been Prabhupada's secretary for a while. He was a stockholder in the he was a trust holder in the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. And he was one of the ones that was one of the named 11. And he started. He even tried to make a guru rock album. And then he actually ended up getting he ended up getting expelled by the GBC, kicked out of the Hare Krishnas for when he got arrested for possession of illegal weapons. He was setting up some like this militia thing. So you had a guru with guns. So he ended up, being expelled for that. Another one who even more grandly, want to talk about a story, was Jayatirtha Swami. This poor guy. He was actually one of Prabhupada's another one of Prabhupada's close disciples, one of the named 11. He actually managed Spiritual Sky, and it's thought that he had a good business sense, and it's one of the reasons he became one of their biggest paying businesses. Still, Spiritual Sky incense, I have some right over here, is still a major seller. Is still a major multi-million-dollar company. So, and really, that's because of him. As I said, he was named one of the one of these gurus. However, he was a really tall guy. It come to find out that even from the very beginning, like when he was doing the Nama Sankirtana, he would sit quietly and walk back and forth. Come to find out, he was using drugs to heighten it. He's one of these people going for a psychedelic thing in the Hare Krsna movement. And when this was found out, he was taking LSD, and he's like, he said, "Oh, it's a wonderful way to open yourself to Krishna." Well, when they found out about this, first they told him he had to stop, and when he didn't stop, he ended up getting kicked out by the GBC, and he was voted and kicked completely out of the Hare Krsna movement. And he actually went and tried to, and he started his own splinter group of Hare Krishnas, by which he was trying to mix LSD with Sankirtan, with the chanting, with the Maha Mantra, and the Nama Sankirtana movement. And he did get some followers. However, one of his followers killed and decapitated him. Well, he's actually his number one follower, who was apparently, they said, mentally unstable. In the middle of one of these psychedelic movements, said he was inspired to cut his head off. So he cut his guru's head off. So much for him. Another one that was Ramesvara Swami. Real name was Robert Grant. He had actually been in charge of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust for a long time. Was very close to Prabhupada. Prabhupada had initiated him through the mail, as is one of his followers. But he was named as one of the 11. He was actually in charge in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles temple. However, he got in trouble, one, because he wasn't chanting anymore. The GBC had to order him to chant a certain chant the Maha Mantra. So you got a guru not wanting to chant the mantra. Should be problems right there. But also started noticing that the funds were going missing. And it come to find out he had a 15-year-old girlfriend, which was one of the daughters of the followers, and he was taking her to the mall and buying her presents. And they kicked him out. He actually resigned, but he was, I mean, not only is he stealing funds from the temple, but he also, was really guilty of statutory rape and maybe could be called a pedophile. She was 15. He's a grown man in his 30s. Ew. Yeah, but out of all of, and there were several others. That was another problem with not just the gurus, but a lot of these young sannyasi. These men had took these lifetime celibate chaste vows of a renunciant monk in their 20s. Well, they're now in their 30s. A lot of them end up getting girlfriends, drinking, breaking the four principles. And they quit the religion in disgrace. Also, a lot of people were becoming very disillusioned by these gurus that were falling out, and they started leaving. So, so it wasn't just these gurus, but the greatest controversy came from Bhaktipada Kirtananda and his Palace of Gold. Kirtananda and the Palace of Gold. This is the soap opera that I was talking about. All of this is kind of a soap opera, but this one, this one could be the movie of the week. I'm surprised they haven't made this into a movie yet. It's but this is real. Everything really went off the rails. First off, let's talk about Kirtananda himself. His real name was Keith Ham. He had been the son of a minister. He even though he didn't graduate college, he was a very highly educated and very highly intelligent man. He knew, especially when it comes to religious studies, because of his upbringing, he knew the Bible inside and out. That was one. Also, he had studied all different religions, and including Indian religions. He had a jump start on that. He actually knew about Chaitanya, and he knew about Vaishnava before he ever met Prabhupada and even traveled to India. So he had kind of a head start on things. And when he was actually one of the very first of his followers when he was still establishing the New York temple. In fact, Kirtananda helped him establish that temple. He first met him when he was giving a talk on the Bhagavad Gita, and he realized he'd found his teacher. And a lot of people called him Kitchenanda because he loved to cook, and Prabhupada had taught him how to cook, prasadam. And apparently he was a very good cook. Everybody called him Kitchenanda. But he was the first to actually take on the Indian clothes, wearing the dhoti, and the kurta, the shawl. And he was the first to shave his head to the sikha, except for the sikha, the little ponytail in the back. He was the first one to do that. He was also the first one to move permanently into the temple, which would become what everybody did, this communal living. But he was the first. Prabhupada did see him as one of his top students and gave him a lot of responsibility. In fact, he even took him with him to India, and he was the first of the devotees to become sannyasi, to take the vow of renunciation and celibacy as a religious monk, a Hindu monk, a Vaishnava monk. And he did it while he was in India with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada really, it looks like, wanted to prime him as one of the guru, a leader and a guru. He wanted him to stay there in India in this kind of like this private spiritual learning experience, this tutorage with him. Keith Ham, Kirtananda, who actually suffered from polio and had to walk with a cane, he was miserable. He was hot. Prabhupada was just seeing this great austerity. This is a great play. You're in India and the heat and the spirituality of it. He was just hot and miserable. And he actually found an excuse to leave. He went back to America while Prabhupada was still in India. And when he went back, he made this kind of crazy power play. He started going around to the temples, because now he was the first, other than Prabhupada, sannyasi. And he went around and started giving talks in all these temples and started trying to blend like esoteric Christianity with bhakti yoga, with the teachings of Chaitanya. Prabhupada, a lot of people were very upset about this in the movement and the way he was trying to, it seemed to them like he was trying to make a power play to take over, or trying to establish himself as the only guru outside of Prabhupada. Prabhupada was not happy either, and he basically banned him from speaking at any temples. Well, in the meantime, Kirtananda, with a few of his own followers, or friends within the group who had been there from the beginning, some have been there with him from the beginning, they actually went to West Virginia, and they leased for 99 years some land in West Virginia, and they established a Hare Krishna community there. And it was his idea that they should use the spot to build a home for Prabhupada, a permanent home for Prabhupada. And they started this grand building exercise. Also started a dairy farm, a dairy farm to protect cows. When they finally met back up with Prabhupada, and tearfully, I think Prabhupada had an affection for a lot of his devotees, but with Kirtananda, I think that he saw the potential in him, and there was this tearful, tearful reunion, and he reinstated him, and Kirtananda really took off building this what's became known as the Palace of Gold. It's supposed to be a permanent home for Prabhupada. Prabhupada actually did visit West Virginia and visit this new property long before this Palace of Gold was finished. And apparently they fed him some of the local food, and apparently he liked poke salad. I grew up in Kentucky and I'm very familiar with poke salad. So, but of course, Prabhupada died before his home was ever finished. Now, but from there, Kirtananda set himself up, and he was, of course, named one of these 11 gurus. And he really set himself up there as guru here at the Palace of Gold, and in this large tract of land, which he renamed New Vrindavan. So in New Vrindavan, he became the guru, and quickly threw that whole initiating guru thing, the Ritivik guru, out the window, and he really became the main guru. And he set up a major operation there, with the farm and the temple and their own publishing company, a lot of other, he really set himself up. This became almost like a Hare Krishna town, by which he was king of this town. He was in complete control. And not only was he a king there, but he also had his own officers and even enforcers. His own, they even had their own arsenal, they come to find out. So this really was like a little religious cult kingdom that he built. His major issue became he saw himself completely as Prabhupada's successor, is the Acharya, which there was no Acharya. And at a GBC meeting, he basically openly made the challenge, saying that he was Prabhupada's, that he didn't have to answer to any of the GBC, didn't have to answer to, to the other gurus, and that he was the Acharya, he was Prabhupada's successor, and that's the way they should see him. And he made that power move, and the GBC kicked him out, and then all of his followers out. When that happened, so he was outside the Hare Krishna movement, outside of ISKCON. He founded his own splinter group, which was known as the as the Eternal League of Devotees Worldwide. He did that in 1988, and he had satellite centers across the USA and Canada. So this wasn't just a small sub-movement. This was become its own major movement with him as the guru, and he became known as Bhaktipada Kurdinanda, which was a name given to him when he took sannyasi. So, and he became, and in this center, he started trying to incorporate. He wanted to see it as like a universal religious movement. So he started changing some things. He tried to he introduced using English rather than Bengali or Sanskrit in the devotions. He started having people wear more like Western, Western or Christian like robes rather than the traditional dhotis and kurtas and the saris for women. They would wear robes. He tried to bring in other types of modern musical instruments. They even started singing Christian hymns that they reworded towards Vaishnavism or towards Bhaktipada. They even changed words in songs like "Go tell it on the mountain that Bhaktipada was born." Yeah. So he literally became a ruling guru king in this compound, in this complex that he built there at New Vrindavan, not far from West Virginia. But the problems came quick. One, the austerity that was being forced upon some of these people in New Vrindavan was just incredible. While he was living in this beautiful chateau on the hill, a lot of them were living in abject poverty. All their money going into the movement, which was, of course, going into for him. He also started a lot of illegal businesses. He was actually had their own printing press, and they were printing up T-shirts and hats and mugs and things like that. They go out and sell at like football games and everywhere, because raising money was a big thing. And he was paying no attention to copyright. So things like of Snoopy or other or Mickey Mouse or other trademark things, they were just openly taking and making these products and selling them without any type of copyright arrangement. And he actually he was also pulling racketeering, and he and then finally the FBI and the IRS walked in, and they charged him. He was indicted for one of the largest mail fraud cases in U.S. history. And also, on another end, there was being a lot of accusations of child abuse. They had their own daycare center and school there, and there become a lot of and some of the followers there were not the most moral people. A lot of them had criminal records, and they ended up at New Vrindavan. And there were several accusations of child abuse. Even Bhaktipada Kurdinanda was accused of child abuse. Now, one thing that did come out and was even admitted later on was that Kurdinanda was homosexual. And in fact, it's one of the other early followers, a man named Howard Reaver, who became known as Haragriva. They had been lovers, and they were still lovers while they were still in this movement. Now, of course, homosexuality is not allowed in the Hare Krishna movement. It's like a lot of religious movements, frowned upon. So you had this. So you had this homosexual guru who was trying to hide it. And apparently there were, that started to come out. Also, there were some people that were starting to turn on Bhaktipada, because of the abuses, and there was a lot of bullying. He basically had his own police force, his own military force there that enforced, and you better not get out of line. So this really become more like a dangerous cult to be in. The main Hare Krishna started publicly calling warnings about this group. One of the GBC leaders even said that this could turn into a Jim Jones type of situation. He said that he thought that they were saying that they're dangerous, they're not part of us, they are separate. Finally, also there were even at least two murders. There was two men in New Vrindavan who really disliked the way that Bhaktipada was running things and the way he treated himself as this supreme guru. And they found out about the Ritivik situation, that Kurnananda and the other gurus are supposed to be just initiatory gurus, not full gurus. That they were all actually initiated as devotees and students to Prabhupada, not Bhaktipada or any of the other of the 11. And they were really pushing this and making noise about it and giving interviews about it and protesting against Bhaktipada. And Bhaktipada had one leader, one of his followers, who was a pretty nasty guy. And we know that one of these young men's name was Charles St. Denis, and Charles St. Denis was killed by this follower. He was assassinated. Now they can't tell for sure if Bhaktipada ordered this or insinuated it. And another one was a guy named Steve Bryant. And Steve Bryant had really made a lot of noise about Bhaktipada and what was going on. And it looks like this same follower assassinated him. So he killed him while he was in his van. He shot him to death. So, yeah, as I said, this is, so you have a king guru running this entire little city with his own police force, his own assassins. This is like something out of a movie. Finally, Bhaktipada was arrested because of all these counts of racketeering, child abuse accusations, even possible conspiracy towards murder. The man that was that had actually committed the two murders was arrested and was put in prison for life for doing this. And ironically, Bhaktipada promoted him to Swami, as a Swami, and him in prison, having killed two people. Yeah. Well, in Bhaktipada, they had enough money that he was actually able to hire Alan Dershowitz, because he got convicted of all of these racketeering and copyright infringements. They couldn't prove the conspiracies to murder, but he hired Alan Dershowitz, the famous lawyer, and he got most of those thrown out, except for like one. And Bhaktipada returned to New Vrindavan. However, that was in the like 1992. So, by that time, he pretty much lost most of his power. They become very disillusioned with him and New Vrindavan in his long time absence. I guess some people had, they were disillusioned. Basically, they saw a way to. They saw through what was going on, and when he returned, he completely lost power, mostly because of another incident known as the Winnebago incident, by which he was caught in a compromising position, actually caught having sex, basically, with a young follower, actually a Filipino follower, who was his personal driver and assistant, in the back of a Winnebago, and that pretty much did it. Your gurus screwing somebody in the back of screwing some young guy in the back of a Winnebago. Yeah. So they ended up kicking him out of out of New Vrindavan. He actually went, him and a few handful of hanger-ons went to a temple that he still had control of in New York. Even they got there. He finally had the conviction came through on the last thing. He had to spend some time in prison. Also, Child Services had determined that he had molested at least two children, and he was supposed to pay reparations for that, which he never did. Finally, even the New York temple had enough of him, and he ended up in the latter years ended up going to India. But in 1996, and believe it or not, when he got to India, even though this was a child molester, this was a crook, this was a power hungry man that really didn't care about his devotees. When he got to India, he became a big guru in his last years. He had followers all over India and Pakistan. And he lived the life of his final years as this great guru. And he finally died from kidney failure in 2011. And in 1996, New Vrindavan, was it 2006 or 2000? No, excuse me. In 1996, the New Vrindavan returned to ISKCON. So by the mid-90s, the Hare Krishna movement was on some pretty shaky legs. In fact, it looked to be in great danger of completely collapsing. I mean, not only did you have the zonal guru scandals, especially the one with Bhaktipada Kirtananda and the Palace of Gold, and that entire fiasco involving child molestation and illegal money rackets and all of that, but also, the infighting between sannyasi and the householders. A lot of people, and also a lot of people, as this time went on, by the 80s and 90s, these younger people that were in the group originally, they started not only to get disillusioned, but they found that it was very hard as they got older to stay with this strict religious movement, where they're required to, no meat eating, no sex, even in marriage, except for children, no intoxicants, including tea and coffee, no gambling, all of this. They took their toll. A lot of them were disillusioned, so you had a huge dropout, and a lot of them, because they couldn't follow the rules, were expelled. They found they were caught eating a hamburger, you're out. And like I said, this was communal living at the time. And you also, and you also got to understand that, because they all lived together like that, there wasn't as many lay people outside. So it was this whole communal thing, and that communal thing started falling apart. And not being able to, with the disinterest now in new religious movements like that had been very popular in the 60s and 70s. Now in the 80s, that had lost popularity. The books sales went up. Vegetarian restaurants are failing because other Indian restaurants are more spicy and some had meat started moving in. So financially, socially, and structurally, the Hare Krishna movement looked like it could possibly collapse. However, after the zonal gurus the zonal guru thing fell apart, it was the GBC, Prabhupada's first group he put in charge to run ISKCON, and legally had the rights by law to run ISKCON as a board. They slowly started. There were some changes made. Some of the more level-headed, smarter, really devoted members that were still, a lot of them householders, had started to take advantage of this downfall of these gurus as a way to start healing some wounds between the sannyasi movement and the householder movement, and bring things back to the way Prabhupada originally had wanted it. Number one, with the expulsion of most of these gurus, they established within the GBC established power again, and they established that they were going back. Gurus still were gurus, but they were to go back to what Prabhupada originally said, that they were initiating rectific gurus, that everyone that was initiated was actually a student and initiate of Prabhupada, and that Prabhupada is the only Acharya. There will be no other Acharya with them, and that all of these gurus could teach had to teach them through Prabhupada's teachings and books. That was one. Number two, presidents of temples or the communities had direct charge over the and legal charge over the temples and communes that were there. Gurus were not, sometimes they could be gurus, but a lot of times they were householders. And even with the gurus, they still were in charge. So that gurus now became more of as teachers within, teachers and guides within the religion, rather than holding this gurus, becoming these little god kings that they thought they were. They were put back into check into what they were supposed to be doing, and that actually worked out pretty well. That's what they started doing. And I think also a lot of those, after that experience, even some of the other gurus that were still around and the ones that were promoted to guru, they learned their lesson. By this time, the immaturity was gone. Most of these people were now in their 40s and 50s. The ones that weren't going to make it were gone. The ones that were still in were very dedicated and devoted. So it had been a filter, and now the real serious Vaishnava Hare Krishna devotees was what was left. And so that actually straightened things up. That ended the fratricidal war. And as far as financial, they'd had a lot of problems. Because they've been trying to what they'd established was, as I said, soliciting out on the street, singing Hare Krishna, selling books, taking donations, and that brought in a lot of money. However, now a lot of places had outlawed that. A lot of people were disinterested. Nobody wanted to buy the books. The book sales were down. So it became a major challenge as to how to raise money in a lot of these temples. And they did a lot of things. As we've noticed, some of them were not quite legal, but they went into every type of business they could. I mean, not just the restaurants, but flower shops. And I know here in Philadelphia they run a painting gallery where they sold paintings to hotels. And that become a business. Also selling flowers, so that kept them afloat. Not as much money as they had before, but it kept them afloat. However, one of their failures, they consider their failures, actually turned out to be one of their salvations, and that would be these people that had been expelled or quit. Well, these people were like anybody else in a religion. You may, simply because you can't keep all the rules, and you may not be the most fastidious religious follower, doesn't mean you don't still believe in it. Don't consider it your faith. A lot of these people that left that couldn't quite give up hamburgers or cigarettes or coffee, and definitely couldn't give up sex either with their spouse or anybody else. Doesn't mean they didn't believe in Krishna, that they didn't believe in Prabhupada, they didn't believe in the movement of Chaitanya, and that they may be smoking cigarettes and drinking tea, but they're still doing the Maha Mantra on their beads 14 times a day or 5 times a day or whatever. Either way, it's just like any other religion. There's plenty of Christians out there. It says, the Bible says, Jesus said, turn the other cheek. How many do that? Plenty of people break a lot of the 10 Commandments, but they still, on a daily basis, but they still consider themselves Christian, and they still go to church, at least on occasion, or even regularly. So, obedience and following the rules doesn't negate the belief that you have. And a lot of these people started, like I said, they still consider, even though they couldn't quite follow it in the communal living, they still consider this religion. They started coming back to the temples. And at first they were really pushed out. You failed, you're out, But over time they kept coming around, and doing the puja and all that. And these people, of course, went out and got jobs and got married and had children, and all this. But so now they're householders, and they could start contributing just like a church, and get, they could apply tithes to these people, which became a major form of income. And another influx that was a big influence and a big change for him was the rise of Indian immigration. You started to get a lot of Indians coming more into the country, especially in the 80s. By the 90s, there was quite a few, and a lot of these people started coming to the Hare Krishna temples. Of course, they didn't have as many Hindu temples in America at that time. There's a lot more now, not just the Hare Krishna. There's a lot of Hindu temples around now. But at the time, of course, they took advantage of what they had, and that was the Hare Krishna temple. So these Indian families started making it their Hindu temple, and they come there. And because of that tolerance in India, it may not be from the exact school. They may have been Shakti, they may have been, Shaivite or whatever else. But yet, that's fine. Krishna's a god. We'll go there. God's God. Pantheism that prevails. God is God and Krishna's God. We can go there. That's fine. So they started, so a lot of these, whether they're Vaishnava or not, started coming to the temples. Well, this was a huge community, and of course, a lot of these Indian families, they come here, they went to college, they have jobs here. A lot of, as we know, a lot of engineers, business owners, all of this. So that was a big influx economically into the temples and the Hare Krishna movement, and really it's been a saving grace. Between that and the not so obedient lay members and their money, it's more turned into a more of the Western style of like a church. And speaking of that, and that is one thing I want to talk about. And remember, I said earlier that it's a fascinating thing to see new religious movements, even if they're old somewhere else, new to America or to the West, come in to see how they develop. And in America, there is a certain pattern. Now, anytime any religion moves into a different culture or a different country, it naturally picks up some of the cultural norms and structure of that country. And that's true of any religion. For instance, take Buddhism. You have, this like you have a different type of Buddhism is slightly different in Burma and Sri Lanka as it is from Thailand. Each one of them have their own flavor from the country, picking up the art and the dress and certain customs from those countries. So like Buddhism is different in Japan than it is from China than it is to, there's a Japanese Buddhism, there's a Chinese Buddhism, there's a Sri Lankan or Southeast Asian form of Buddhism. They take on, even though they all was some difference between Mahayana and Theravada, but they're all Buddhists. It's just they become, there's a certain regional and national and cultural, version of it. Well, anytime a religion comes to America, whether it be Islam, whether it be Hinduism, Christianity, all of them, they pick up a certain American version. There is definitely an American version of Buddhism that has evolved over the last 50 years. And definitely the same thing with Islam. There's very much becoming an American form of Islam. And with the Hare Krishnas, there is definitely becoming an American version of Vaishnava. And probably even an American version of Hinduism in general. And so they all follow a certain pattern that is part of American culture, and which a culture is a viewpoint and a way of living, and that viewpoint and way of living definitely filters into these religions. And to watch that happen is kind of fascinating to me, to see it evolve. And with the Hare Krishnas, that's definitely what happened. What is happening, and because of what I was talking about before, is what is commonly known as Protestantization or congregationalism. Basically what happens is that a lot of these religions, no matter how they were run in their own countries, no matter the social structure and the hierarchy that developed in their countries, when they get into America, they eventually, sometimes painfully, end up adopting the American, the way Protestant churches are run in America. They usually follow that structure, especially economically. Well, economically and socially. They still have the religious beliefs, but the structure, how it's run, and the money, how they get their money, and how that works, definitely takes an American flavor. And I'm going to explain how. Just like with, this is true like with the, let's take the Church of England that came here. Now, with the Church of England, before, a priest was the head of the church. What he said, when he came over, their minister, their priests for the Church of England, they come to America, in England, he is the head. There's a hierarchy of bishops. That's why the bishops and priests, and they're the ones that run the church. They're the ones that are in charge. Economically, spiritually, socially, they're in charge. Well, when it got over here to America, and after the Revolutionary War, it became the Episcopal Church. Suddenly, it took very much the American democratic thing. Americans are not very fond of someone being in charge of them, of being completely in charge. They believe it. We definitely will turn to a democratic system. We don't like one person being authority over everything. Not for long. If you do, it's generally a cult. But in most, so we set up. We want elected officials to run anything that we do. We want a committee. We want the chairman of the board, the elections and all of that. And that's what they did with the Church of England. You have the vestry, which was voted in members of the church. They're in charge of the church. The priest is like kind of like the president. They're like the Congress. And that goes through the bishops and all. Everybody's elected. Everybody's brought in through a committee system, and the vestry really is in charge of the church. Now, this is Roman congregationism, where the congregation's actually in charge of the church and what happens in church, and they can overrule their clergy. That clash between clergy and congregation has been around in Europe forever. Well, in America, eventually, somebody may start a church, but you give it 30 years and there's going to be a vestry. There's going to be the church committee that runs things, especially financially. And it's usually in a lot of the Baptist churches, it's usually made up of little old ladies. They're the ones who do the cake drives. But that's the American system. That's what ends up happening. And you see this repeated even in some of these other religions. Also, you got to understand, churches and religious institutions are kept up by donations by the congregation, and people that end up giving money generally want some control. If you're giving money to something, I want to vote in it. And that's the way they did. And this particularly happened with the Hare Krishnas, and it's still happening now. Now, by the system, you still have the GBC, you still have the gurus and the reverence for them, which they see as the old Vedic system of the gurus and the teachers and that hierarchy. However, what's ironic is the more Western, heritage, people of more Western and heritage, as opposed to the Indians, the traditional Westerners actually want and have wanted that guru system, that the reverence for the guru and everything answers to the guru in all affairs. But the new Indian population, who are giving a lot of money to this temple, they're very ironically, they're the opposite. They're taking up the Western. They're taking up the Western tradition and gusto, and they're like, you know what? We're giving a lot of money to this temple. We want some say. And in that clash between clergy and congregation, the one with the money usually wins in America. And that's what I've seen happen. I've seen some presidents of some temples pushed out by the leaders of the congregation. And the congregation, but they do, just like with the Church of England, there becomes a balance between executive power and congressional power of between the clergy and the and the congregation. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening with the Hare Krishnas, which ironically it's reversed. It's most of the Western people, Western-born people, want the guru system, whereas the Indians, they very much taking that part of the American pie. They want the congregation. They want the charge. And in truth, in India, that debate's still there too. A lot of those temples are run by wealthy families or groups that had built the temple. So they're more used to this. Whereas Americans see this more idealized India. Well, these Indians have come. These Indian Americans are showing that. The reality when it comes to the economy of religion. Now, another interesting thing is is talking about where is ISKCON and the Hare Krishna movement going, and it's like any religion, things have to evolve and change. A religion that does not evolve with the times dies eventually. And the Hare Krishna movement, the American Vaishnava, you could call it, are definitely evolving. We're getting now. Prabhupada died in 1977, and a lot of those his early followers and those gurus, they're dying out. They're people now in their 70s, kicking into their 80s. It's 2022, and so a lot of them, all the original followers, are dying out, and the new generations that have come in, a lot of them have been American Indian immigrants that have moved here, and their children. Now, their children have been raised now, second and third American generations now, have been raised in the Hare Krishna temples, and with this hybrid American version of Vaishnava Hinduism. And that's their religion now. Even if their parents had been part of another sect, before they came here, that their children have been raised American Vaishnava with that combination, and that's what that's what they consider their religion. So it is really becoming a hybrid of traditional Indian belief systems and rituals and practices, but with an American flavor, with a part of American culture. There has been a melding, and I'll even tell you, I never forget when I was visiting a temple here in Philadelphia. There was a Indian family in there, and they'd come in for the daily bhajan to celebrate. They had their husband, wife, kids, and after the bhajan, they were talking to their kids about what Santa Claus was going to bring them. And also, around Christmas, and I'm sure they did it this year, it's not uncommon in the temple area, in the Hare Krishna temples, to see a Christmas tree, in the temple, and even see the deities like Krishna and Chaitanya, which are worshipped within their within their temples, to be dressed like Santa Claus in Christmas clothes. So, can I give you any more of an example of how the Hare Krishna movement, by which Prabhupada had brought here to bring this religious tradition and movement, which he saw the right way to God, bring it to America? Well, he brought it to America. America accepted it, and now it's become American. And I find that a beautiful. I don't know if he would have saw that coming, but I think he would have liked it. The Hare Krishna movement, the Vaishnava now has an American voice, and it will come from an American culture with now three generations since its founder, and now it's part of the American dream. Well, okay, folks. That's all I've got on the Hare Krishna movement. I've really enjoyed doing these 3 lessons. If you haven't seen lesson 1, lesson 2, please, you can check my videos and go back and watch lesson 1 and lesson 2. And while you're there, you know what? Go ahead and hit that this little purple chair and give me a subscribe, give me a like. I'd love to have you. Also, if you have any comments or would like to discuss anything about the Hare Krishna movement or Hinduism, please throw it in the comments. I will answer. I love to have these type of discussions, so long as they're done respectfully. So and stick around. I got plenty more stuff coming up. So you know what? Until I see you next time, Find yourself a comfy chair, find yourself a good book, and pursue your passion. Later.